Oral communication of scientific works. A research work is only completed when it is communicated through written or oral presentation. This allows to disseminate knowledge and contribute to the knowledge progress. Due to its importance, it must be done in an efficient way. Scientific works communication are mostly done by either written research report and results, publicated in the form of theses, reports, working papers, articles or books, or oral presentations such as public defenses, conferences, seminars, workshops, or webinars, just like this one. So, there are different types of oral presentations depending on the duration of the presentation and its audience, which could be general public, scientific academic, subject specialist expert, etc. Usually, general public presentations tend to be longer, from 30 to 60 minutes. This is because it is required more time for the development of the context to become understandable. On the other hand, presentations for experts tend to be shorter, from 10 to 30 minutes, like conferences, keynote speeches, disciplines, masters, and PhD defenses. Here, the relevance of the topic is presented, then the framework, methodology, and the main investigation techniques used to obtain results, and finally, the discussion and conclusion of these results. Oral presentation of scientific works must be given at a summarized technical level. Should summarize the investigation carried out. Oral presentation idealized as telling a story, more focused on the problem and investigation question and less on the technical details. But don't forget to focus on important technical details, such as the model equations and empirical results. It must emphasize what is most important in the investigation and the innovative aspects of the research in question. It must be considered that the audience will only be able to retain a limited number of ideas. So, what are the main points you want them to retain? Also, don't forget that presentation is subjective and personal, so there is no single correct approach. Preparation of the oral presentation. When preparing for an oral presentation, it is a good practice to have a summary of the written work and, of course, to plan the presentation itself. Define the objectives that you want to achieve for this presentation and the strategy, which methods and techniques will you use. Check if there are any materials or additional equipment that you will need. Use visual aids and activities to keep the audience interested. Finally, a good rule of thumb is to estimate around 1 slide per minute. Preparation of the oral presentation. Contents. As mentioned before, it is extremely important to prepare in advance. You should write the design of the presentation so that you can follow a structure. Don't forget to train for the allotted time, as you want to make the most of the time you are granted. So, prepare what you are going to say and practice it until you know it very well. Preparation of the oral presentation. Phases. This process can be divided into 3 phases, with the first one being the preparation phase. Here, you will need to choose what do you want to broadcast and which format will you use based on its contents. You should also do an evaluation on how can you achieve the proposed objectives. How much time do you have available for the presentation? Where will the presentation take place? What are the location characteristics? And what is your target audience? Next, you have the development phase. Here, you will need to take care of the presentation. You need to talk about the relevance, objectives, framework, and structure of your research, as well as the development, the analysis, methodology and data, and the results obtained. You need to think about what to say and the strategies to use. Finally, there is the conclusion phase. You need to synthesize the most relevant ideas of the work because, as mentioned before, the audience cannot keep up with all of your ideas. Preparation of the presentation. Some secrets to a good scientific talk. Start preparing the material carefully and logically. You should sound like you are telling a story which has 4 parts. Starting with the introduction, then the framework and method, going through the results and the conclusion. Practice your talk so that you are confident with your words. Don't put in too much material, avoid having way too many questions or technical language, and have only a few conclusion points. By doing this, your audience can keep up way easier. Remember that you are talking to the audience and not to the screen, so let them know that. Avoid making distracting sounds or movements, either with your hands or body. Lastly, polish your graphics. Use large letters, so no font smaller than 16 points. Keep the graphics simple, use colors and cartoons. Speaking now about the visual aids of the slides, there are a few basic principles of readability. There is the exploration area, the content presentation form. You should also take notes about the character type, the minimum height of characters and symbols, the thickness of character strokes, the spacing between letters and words, and very important, the line spacing, which must be at least equal to the height of the characters, and the colors, which suggest interest, highlight, and can be useful to separate and differentiate subjects. There are 3 different sections that you should take into account when building the slides. These are the form, contents, and communication. Starting with the form, there is the letters where you need to pay attention to the type and the size of the letter, the colors of the letters and their background, the amount of text, so you don't want to put much text on your slide, and you do want to make use of image, graphs and tables, as well as animations and some effects. Now about the contents, you need to do some planning and the capacity of synthesis, as mentioned before, and you need to look out for your words and sentences. Related to the communication, you must pay attention to the presentation time and the number of slides that you have. Here are some other aspects that you should take into account when building your slides. Do not extend the slide to the margin, as it reduces the readability. Use a minimum size of letters of either 16 or 18 points. Differentiate the size of the titles, so the actual size of the title should be bigger than the actual text of the slide. Use a minimum space between lines of 1.5. Do not make use of more than 3 letter styles or 3 font colors, as it will have the opposite effect and confuse the audience. And preferably use sans serif fonts such as Arial, Verdana and Calibri. Use of colors. Information transmitted to the unconscious. So you can express yourself by using colors as they have a meaning. For example, red can mean enthusiasm, closeness, and warmth. On the other hand, blue is a cold color and it has a relaxant effect. Brown, for example, transmits a sense of trust and comfort, and gray a lifeless or a off effect. Orange can have a meaning of energy and heat. About the use of visual aids, with tools like PowerPoint, Prezi, and Handouts, you can compare the weakness of spoken words for hard understanding versus faster and more complete visual comprehension. This results in a complete spoken speech with visual aids. Include figures and graphs captioned, which have a greater impact, because remember that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but also keep in mind that the audience must perfectly understand the image. The image should be a complement to the presentation and never its focus. Also, you must always visualize the study developments or model equations and present the empirical results and its discussion. Preparation of the oral presentation. Global design. The first slide should be a presentation of the author, institution, place and date, the theme of the work, and what kind of presentation is this, if it is a communication in conference, a master defense, etc. Then from 1 up to 3 slides to the introduction, where you explain the relevance or the motivation of the research, the objectives and research question, and the structure. Then 1 slide for the analysis of the framework, 2 to 3 slides on how the investigation was carried out, where you speak of the methodology and data. Then the most slides goes to the results or empirical evidence, 3 to 4 slides. And finally, the conclusion with the final synthesis, 1 or 2 slides, where you make a relation to the objectives. You should only conclude on what has been presented. This will be a sequential order and should give a feeling of a conduction wire. Apart from this structure, you can have single slides for additional topics. For example, 1 slide for study limitations and other for future work or future investigation leads. But it is absolutely mandatory that the inclusion of tables or works from other sources have the source cited. Preparation of the oral presentation. Contents. The introduction of your presentation should take around 1/3 of the time. Here you should explain the relevance of the investigated topic and notice that the first 1 or 2 minutes are the most critical for the audience attention. You can use the strategy where you talk about the importance of the topic or the new aspects that this research has compared to previous one. Then the conclusion, which should take about 10 to 60% of the total presentation time. So, for example, if a presentation takes 30 minutes, the conclusion shouldn't take much longer than 3 minutes. But it is as important as the introduction. You should include what you want the audience to memorize in the conclusion. Start the conclusion with the words "in conclusion." This signals the audience that the presentation is almost over and attracts the attention of the audience again. After saying that signal, you must present the conclusions clearly and concisely. About the oral presentation itself, you really should practice the oral presentation because you might be nervous or just have some interruption when presenting. So, for example, if you have an allotted time of 20 minutes, you should be able to present in 90 minutes. If you have 15 minutes, you should make it in 14 minutes. And the same goes for 10 minutes to 9 minutes. Do not forget to reveal the subject domain, to use your voice clearly, to have some sort of interaction with your audience, and to be creative. Also make sure you use visual aids, so appropriate methods and techniques. Do not forget to always end the presentation with a phrase of thanks and possibly inciting questions by using visual aids. Remember that listeners will retain more of the beginning and the end of the presentation, so you can use catchphrases like "Thank you for the attention" and "Do you have any comments or questions?" So, thank you very much for your attention.